Hi, everyone. Harry here with the ever trenchant and estimable Rich Bernstein, who you know from other events here. Rich was really struck by, as so many people were, the kind of ridiculous Orwellian sacking of Dr. Erica McIntarfer, who committed the great sin of accurately reporting a weaker than Trump expected, even the market expected jobs report, completely provoking Trump's ire. He was persuaded she'd cooked the books before. She was doing it again. He sees it all through a political prism. Anyway, Rich, thanks for joining. And I think you have a sense, including from other areas, of just what it means to fire someone, not because of political differences, but you just don't like the numbers they bring you. What sort of came to mind when you saw this?
Well, this is such a rare thing. Think about it. Joe Biden had terrible CPI numbers. The head of the BLS, which also does the CPI numbers, not just the unemployment numbers, was a Trump appointee. Never considered firing the Trump appointee. And by the way, that Trump appointee is now defending the commissioner who Trump fired. It's just, this does not happen in Western countries that have functioning political systems. Because the financial consequences are so great, but other people talked about that. What?
What do you mean by that exactly?
Oh, well, what happens to countries that do this is they lose the faith of investors and lenders because you introduce uncertainty. Imagine if you were going to buy a house and just before you bought it, you found out that the information you were getting about home prices in that area was not coming from an independent third-party source, but was coming from the seller of the house. You'd have doubts. It introduces uncertainty. Uncertainty leads to fewer transactions, and the transactions that do happen tend to happen at lower value. I mean, that's economics 101. But what I'm really concerned about is less the economic implications than the political implications, because it is so rare. The thing that matters in this country more than anything else in elections is the economy. Our jobs pretty good. Is inflation pretty much in control? And no matter how bad those numbers have been, and we've had in our lifetimes 5 or 6 presidents lose re-election, including Trump the first time, basically because of the economy. 2020, because of COVID, was a terrible economic year. And he didn't fire people who were bringing out the economic statistics. He's so emboldened now that he's willing to do that. And that is depriving the American people of the information they are used to getting, unbiased, reliable economic numbers, so they can decide, should we reward this person by electing more Republicans in 2026? Or should we register our disapproval and elect some Democrats, let's say to control the House, introduce a check and balance, require the president to deal with Democrats in the House to make a budget, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, President Trump has done what he has a pattern of doing. If he doesn't like the numbers, he doesn't change policy, he doesn't reflect, he tries to influence or put in place allies who will rig the numbers.
Well, let me just interrupt you, because that's exactly right. It's just, it would never occur to you that anyone in the government would be cooking those numbers until now, because now that he's put his own people in, how can you trust them? And as you say, that has all kinds of downstream potential effects. But I gotta really, I mean, you say he has a pattern. He does have a pattern, but we sort of absorbed the pattern of a real news story comes out, they call it fake news, of certain lies. But to actually say statistics, numbers of New York are, and he actually came out, I don't know if you saw this, he said she had done it before to try to get the election to Biden. Right. I thought she was lying. He basically has told all his supporters.
She's done the exact opposite. She was
exactly right, yeah.
When there was, in August, an 800,000 downward reduction in jobs in August 2024. And then right before the election, the BLS number was the weakest job number of 2024. So I think psychiatrists call it projection. he's accusing other people of what he's doing, and
which would have been inconceivable, right? I don't know this woman. I know she's a professional, and it just, this is part of being in a stable democracy. When these numbers come out, of course they are accurate. You can spin them, whatever, but the notion that they themselves are politically massaged in a way to be not the actual numbers is mind-bending, right?
But it's the pattern that worries me. And here's what I mean by the pattern. Put aside what he did in private business. COVID. Yeah. We're getting high COVID case numbers. He literally went on TV and said, I want Republican politicians to stop testing because the more we test, the higher the case numbers are. Well, the one thing they couldn't fake was deaths. So eventually we found out the truth about COVID, but unfortunately it was through very high death numbers. 2020 election, put aside January 6th. He spent 2 months trying to convince Brad Raffensperger and other Republican politicians to change the numbers. Nobody had ever done that before. Not going to court and saying, here's a legal claim, and allowing, and in many of these states, it was Republican appointed judges to decide, but going to political elected officials and appointed officials and saying, just override the will of the voters.
I just need 11,980 votes. So, just add it right.
And what I worry about, why did he do this? He did this because, in my view, in my opinion, he's worried about the 2026 election. He likes having no check and balance. And if the Democrats win the House in 2026, there won't be a complete check and balance. He'll still have the Supreme Court essentially, in his view, with some support in his pocket. He'll still have the Senate in his pocket. He'll still have the executive branch for the most part in his pocket. But he's worried about having to deal with the House, a Democratic House on the budget, and he's worried about Democratic investigations. So one bad jobs number, and it wasn't even that terrible a jobs number. There were actually some positive things in the report. Average hourly earnings went up. Average hours worked per week went up. And it was only 1 month. If he reacts that way, how's he going to react on election night and the subsequent nights in November 2024 if there are a couple of key House seats that are going to decide who's going to control the House and they're still counting ballots? And my fear is he's going to do what he did in 2020, even though he won't be on the ballot, and he will go to officials that are beholden to him and say, just declare new numbers. And I hope the country is prepared for it, because if he can't stomach one mediocre jobs report, how's he going to stomach losing control of the House?
It's such an important point. And, or he'll go to the DOJ, which in 2020 refused to do the dirty work. But it's quite clear now. We saw the Deputy Attorney General go down to Florida for, Trump's own political purposes. What Jeff Clark tried to do, but Rosen and Donahue shut down, certainly Bondi and Blanche would do. Let me just ask you. Well, first, I have one observation, which then I thought but now this undermines everything. Undermining everything actually sort of serves its purpose. If people believe it's always political, then everything's got play in the joints, and he can make sort of any claim he wants.
And it's worked for him. It's worked for him. By challenging the 2020 election, he convinced the majority of Republicans.
Can you imagine?
The election had been stolen from him, and then they felt the only way to right that wrong in the primaries was to give him the nomination again rather than DeSantis or Haley. The polls showed that the key thing in deciding whether Republican primary voters voted for Trump or voted for DeSantis and Haley was, do you believe the 2020 election was stolen? He thinks this kind of thing works, and he's got some reason to think it works.
And by the way, there's real reports that it's literally a test you have to take to work in the White House, and you better get Orwellian right quick and say the counterfactual thing if you want a job. I just want to ask you, Rich, do you happen to know? So let's say now he puts in a lackey. That person cooks the books, or let's say McIntarfer had done what he had said, is it a crime to knowingly put out false job report?
I think it would be in at least one instance, and it might be in others. In at least one, if you file a report with Congress that is required by law, that's a violation of the false statement statute, 18 U.S.C.
1001.
1001, okay. Exactly. And the annual report from BLS, which takes the monthly numbers and collates them, is required by law. I also think there would be an interesting argument if one BLS official lied to another BLS official, because lying to the executive branch is also a violation of Section 1001, whether those people would be at risk. Of course, thanks to the Supreme Court, I'm sure Trump doesn't feel he's at risk because his communications with the BLS and with his economic advisors would likely be considered official acts, would likely be presumptively immune, and nobody in the world knows what could possibly overcome the Supreme Court's presumption of immunity. So,
but I know one thing that can't, which is the DOJ is not going to come in and prosecute those cases.
Anything he does through the DOJ, they've said, is absolutely
federal. Yeah. Look, this is really useful and illuminating I thought this was pretty important. Many people did, but I think you've kind of shown that it is way important. I just want to, you and I have talked a little bit about this offline, and there's this notion you drew that, people will say, governments make up shit all the time, so this is just a variation on a theme. And I think you've shown that, there are instances, but this is absolutely characteristic of autocracies and autocracies only to lie about. Anyway,
some things are out of bounds.
I wanted to give you the last word with that thought. Yeah,
our government didn't lie about financial statistics during World War I or the Civil War. Okay, so that wasn't enough. Now, admittedly, we had really great presidents then, but that wasn't enough to get our government to put out false financial statistics. And there are some things that the American people have a right to expect to be out of bounds. One of them would be, I would say, economic numbers, because it's so important to elections. And the other would be casualties in any sort of military operation. And to their credit, neither Trump administration, to my knowledge, has lied about casualties. To their credit,
it's pretty damn low bar, I'll just say.
Well, it's a low bar, but you would have thought not firing the people who calculate economic statistics for the government, the notion that, political operatives, the career path they would choose would be 30 years as a statistician. I mean, come on, man. I mean, it's a joke. It's a joke that those people are doing things politically. But, perhaps this was a tantrum, but my guess is this is part of, and all the stuff that's going on with redistricting, which is another video. He is deathly afraid of losing even one house of Congress in the midterms. And I think he's going to do all sorts of stuff. And this is one that no president has ever done before in order to either prevent that, or if it does happen, to claim that it didn't happen.
Rich Bernstein, always a pleasure being with you. Hope to see you soon.
Likewise. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.